You're muted. I never mute us. That must have been automatic today. What's up, Kelsey?
Hi. All the
There's a
previous
high
recordings
ceiling
are all
behind you. What is
muted. You're
that?
like, oh shit.
What is that high ceiling behind you?
The high ceiling or the unfinished ceiling?
Oh, I was going to the next step, which is that where the popcorn was?
Yes, that was where the popcorn was.
I don't know what it looks like right there, but it looks better than popcorn.
Exactly, right? It just needs like a little finishing. It's fine. We'll get there.
Depth of completeness, right?
Hmm.
Okay, so I apologize. I was just going to give this quick spiel that I give every time for this. And it doesn't look like there's very many folks here, like only us and you. But we'll go through them one more time. They are available in Dotloop as of today, but they are not in your templates yet. So, and don't stress about writing them on the most current contract. If you're making an offer or doing something between now and when all the templates come in, we'll just do it. There's nothing so catastrophic or so crazy in there that has changed that it's going to wreck your deal or do anything with it and stuff. So, but by next Friday, I think is the plan for at least us. I don't know about you guys, Denise, but we should have them all in the templates and have the other ones all kind of removed so that they aren't coming in there anywhere. Overall structure, 3 years worth of work on these forms. Orphaned language, bad verbiage, wrong language in it or something like that. Lines that didn't get there anymore. At one point, they had an iteration that didn't have the line numbers on the left-hand side. So they've added in all of the things that we like back and tried to make all of them similar in terms of boilerplate language, no matter what the form is. So if you're looking at a contract that is a residential purchase contract that is cash, and you look at a commercial contract to purchase, which is cash, those things will look similar in boilerplate language, and then just have the specific changes from the residential to the commercial part of it. There were a few forms that we didn't have before that they've added in. We didn't have an addendum and amendment and an amendment for each individual contract that we write. Sometimes we had an amendment only, sometimes we had an addendum only. So they've made those all available now in terms of what it is. Also, additionally, because we don't have a broker signature in Wyoming, you don't have that as a requirement. Don't know if Lana makes you guys have her sign them or not.
Sign what?
Any form that you have.
No.
Okay. So I can't imagine that Lana would, but
Mm-mm.
so because you don't have to sign in Wyoming, you're going to see that the language on the bottom left
What a pain that would be. You
is
have
is
100 employees and you gotta sign all these.
South Dakota and Colorado. Every broker
Yep.
signs every single form.
Yep, every form.
By hand, not
Not
auto
by
pen?
hand. Not by hand. It's digital signature.
Oh, okay, okay,
Still,
okay.
yeah, it's a requirement. So
That's still a lot.
what ours have changed to now is that it'll say licensee for brokerage firm every time it's your signature.
Mhm.
And it takes out the broker listing and the broker name that used to be floating around on some of these forms and stuff like that. So I'm gonna jump in, stop me if you have any questions. Kelsey, stop me if I'm being a dum dum at some point or whatever the case is, and let me know, please.
You got it. I've got a closing at 11, so I'll keep you on the phone
Congratulations.
until then, but thank you.
Congratulations. Walkthrough was good.
Yeah. This is like the
Nice.
easiest transaction, so I'm feeling good.
It's got to balance out some other ones, right?
Right.
Okay. You can catch me, Kelsey, at the end or whatever when we get to these other ones. But these recordings are available too, and we'll be talking about them for the next, I don't know, 3 months probably.
Cool.
Okay. So professional services disclosure. We're going to recommend in our brokers that you use this. This came out of the Northeast area, probably from Kevin Beck, something that he did, I would imagine. But it gives you an opportunity to have a conversation with your buyers and or your sellers, that you are a real estate agent and that all of these other services that are in here are not your realm of expertise. Okay. We're going to do it. We've added the language into the buyer agency agreement. This, I think you do your buyer agency agreement and your real estate brokerage disclosure, and you do that set. And then when you get ready to make an offer, or if you're listing, but if you're ready to make an offer, then you use this in with that form. We'll make it optional probably in our brokerage, but with an encouraged, like you should probably do this kind of thing. And then when you're listing and when you're buying the section that's about, repairs and whatever, you get a third opportunity to talk about it. But Cameron, who is the investigator for the Wyoming Real Estate Commission, basically says that this is about 98 or 95% of what people are having complaints about. And if you use this, yeah, be the responsibility part of it, right? Them saying, I didn't know, and them saying, why didn't you tell me, or why didn't you communicate, or why didn't you talk about it? So it's usually what's called a communication or a misunderstanding, but he says that most of it is related to whose responsibility lies for what and what you got going on and that kind of thing. So poor conversations between agents and the customers or the clients that they represent. So this gives you an opportunity to talk about all of the things that you got. And it'll be presented, like I said, in the buyer agency agreement, if this one, if you add it in, and then in the contract to purchase and the contract to list, it's also in there as well, right? So
Is
lots
the
of,
form really gonna help? It makes
it
me
doesn't-
wonder.
it doesn't help that as long as you have the discussion though,
Mhm.
I think it's there. Like if I skip over this part and I don't have this discussion, me putting this form in front of you changes nothing. But me putting this form in, like when we train and we say, hey, this is gonna be part of your listing package, or this is gonna be part of your buyer's packet. Now I've got to have it in front of me. At least it forces you to acknowledge that it's there. And hopefully you have that conversation and we continue to do it. But you're right. All of these forms, all of this stuff we always talk about, none of it's ever good until it's tested in court. And none of it's ever good if you don't use it and have a conversation about it. So, yeah, very true though. So professional services disclosure, we're gonna recommend that you use it and have the conversation. Don't, Russ.
Okay, I'm good, go.
Okay.
Go.
Thought I was gonna get grilled by Russ there for a second. Earnest money release form, we never really had one in Wyoming. At least in the official forms, everybody had something that they were using. Most of the time we were sending the inspection contingency notice with a release on it and then saying, hey, based on this statute, everybody's gonna get their earnest money back. Title companies pushed back a little bit, having conversation, was that really an agreement by both parties of what to do with the money? And the Wyoming Association of Realtors said, nope, it is probably not. Oh, that is the last thing I'll tell you is, so they did all this stuff to make it consistent, fix all the language and all that kind of thing. And then their number one overarching goal after that was to protect us as realtors, because the statutes and all of those things are there to protect the public. And this is to protect us in our transactions and to do it. And that's why they hired Mike Lansing and did all that and put together these forms. Not every group out there, association, does forms. Wyoming does. And because they did that, because they paid for them, because they're all copywritten at this point, there are specific uses that you can do, which is your business, business associated with you, what you do as a realtor, those kinds of things. But when you get to the documents, there's going to be a very first one, which is a use policy, and you're going to want to read through that. You cannot give this to a for sale by owner that you know that wants to use this contract. Has to be you, your use, your business, that kind of thing.
Licensed.
Yeah,
Yes,
because
yeah.
you're getting a temporary license to be able to use it.
Mhm.
In this
Yes, sir.
earnest money release, right, you gotta have an agreement by both parties, and then there's a designated, where does the money go? How much goes to the buyer, how much goes to the seller, listing agent, selling agent, whatever the case is. So just fill it out and you can use it. It also does give you a little bit of separation between a cancellation of a contract or a voidable contract at that point and the earnest money section, right? I can be out of contract and still not know what I'm doing with the earnest money.
So this is only filled out if your transaction's falling apart, or do you fill this out upfront
No,
before?
no.
Is it
No,
like
no,
a
no. When it's
No.
decided and it's going out of contract, whoever's giving.
So it's at the end, it's when it's going south.
Yeah.
It's not an upfront form as to what will happen if it goes
No,
south.
and it's
Okay.
really intended to go to the title company, so the title company doesn't have to hunt it down.
Mhm.
And then it's all laid out and everybody's agreed,
Mhm.
and now it's filed, so it fits the statute and everything.
Okay.
for it, so.
Yeah, this form is just, it's state done, but it's no different than the forms they use for termination of contract and release of earnest money. Same purpose.
Agreement to extend exclusive right to buy contract. So we have had an addendum to your buyer agency contract, we have not had an amendment. And in a court of law, technically, an amendment, of course, is to change things. An addendum is to add things that didn't exist before. Could we use them all for the same thing? Would it probably work out? Probably, but we lose a little bit of credibility if we're not doing it on the right form because they don't think we understand what we got going on, and we're not supposed to be practicing law, right? So if you're going to change something, use an amendment. If you're going to add something, use an addendum. Example for this one, if I write this as a single day buyer agency agreement, and I want to change that end date to be 6 months from now, I can use an amendment. If I put one property on this, I could do an addendum to add additional properties that I would additionally have a relationship with and get paid for and have commitments for. Or I could do an amendment again on the other side and just say all properties in Laramie County that we look at or we show we're under contract for.
Yeah.
So just use the right form and know that every contract you have at this point now has an addendum and an amendment for it. The other thing that happens is some of the addendums and things were just blank pages, not tied back with any kind of legal language to the contract that you were tied to. So all of those have been updated. All of that boilerplate language is all the same now at this point. We were using a form, and you were going to recognize it because I stole it from EXP, but we were using a listing change authorization form, typically to make adjustments to a listing contract. It's going to be a little bit different for us now. If we're already under contract, as opposed to doing an amendment to the additional contract, we may do an addendum or a change or something. But if there is something that's going to change, this is the amendment part of it, right? So you're going to change the listing price. You're going to change when the contract expires because you're going to extend it. Seller instructs the broker to cease marketing on the property if they're going to pull it off. So we had questions before, if you're going to pull it off and make it in or withdraw it for a little while, what you do, that goes on this form. And then the additional thing that I would do on this form is if your seller has given you information to disclose, which would not be something normally out there that would be confidential, write that in here, what they're allowing you to say, and have them sign off on it. And that way, if they tell you, please let them know that we have a job starting on May 1st. We need to be there 2 weeks ahead of time, help us get the property sold, that you're covered for any of those kind of disclosures that you might be making. As you look at these forms and we go through them, you're going to see that all the titles are in the top right-hand corner. Then you're going to have, and I don't think new is going to stay. I think I haven't looked at the new forms yet, but if there's any changes or what the form's being used for or anything like that, it'll be in this section right here so you can do it. Vacant land disclosure. This one is not something that you're going to see very often. It is the only property disclosure required in the state of Wyoming. So we're going to go over it real quick. And the reason that they changed the form is it used to have all kinds of different stuff in it that didn't apply specifically to the statute. It was somebody's interpretation of all that. They took all the extraneous stuff out, and now it only applies to what the statute is trying to cover. So if your piece of land that you're going to sell in the state of Wyoming meets all three of those criteria on line 4, 5, and 6, then you're required to have this property disclosure. One is that it's no habitable dwelling on the piece of land. 2 is that it's not within the boundaries of a subdivision, city, or town. And 3rd is that it's less than 140 acres. This is the Swampland in Florida Act kind of thing. This is the 40 acres north of Rollins that's in the tundra in the middle of nowhere piece. And if that is the case, and you need to know if you have access to it, you need to know if you have gas to it, utility service to it, if there's water on it, if there's sewer service available, you got to answer all these questions. Now, a buyer, by checking this box, can waive and say, I'll buy it without this disclosure.
Check in what box? Oh, right there.
This
I
box
see
right
it.
here.
I see it.
So if they want to still purchase it and they know this form exists and they waive all of those rights, they can still do it.
Okay, so stop, time out, so I understand this form, because obviously this is new, I haven't seen this before. So this is a form that's already filled out by the seller of the property, correct?
So every seller in the state of Wyoming, if their property fits this, is required to provide this disclosure, unless they say, and I've seen them listed this way, seller will not provide vacant land disclosure. Buyer can choose to waive or not purchase. So you may not have one filled out, but if they're gonna fill it out, yes, the landowner fills it out.
But then it goes to the seller, and if they choose to check that block, they can,
Goes
The
to the
buyer.
buyer.
or the buyer rather, and then they can check that block.
Well,
and
so
sign
so like
below.
you could grab this form. So in that case, a seller would probably go, "Hey, look, I'm not filling one out, and I'm not providing one." So a buyer can either waive their rights or they can not purchase. I don't care.
Okay, so as a buyer's agent, I can pull this out of the system, just have my buyer check that block
Yeah.
and sign below.
Yeah.
And provide it to the seller.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And it is not going to happen very often, right? Because most of the time when you get out into the country in Wyoming, you're going to be either bigger than 140 acres or you're going to be in a subdivision, even if they chopped off 20 off of 160 or something like that.
So,
But just know, and the other form was a whole bunch of extra junk. We just talk about it specifically because there is no other property disclosure required in the state of Wyoming. This is the one, and if you fit it, it's just a yes or no. It either fits the categories or it doesn't for what it is.
cool.
It's just a disclosure? I mean, what's the purpose of it?
So, for example, there are tracts of land north of Rollins that are 40-acre tracts that you see advertised on Facebook, on whatever. And they're usually pretty cheap, 40,000, 50,000, like $1,000 an acre kind of stuff. So you get out there though, and you find out that it is 50 miles to get power to the property. Then it is no sewer unless you do septic and well. And who knows, maybe you're in the Wild Horse Ranch doesn't count, but maybe you're in an area where there isn't access to water because water is too deep to drill for, or whatever the case is. So if you're buying those chunks, Wyoming says you should have information about the remoteness of them, all that kind of stuff, what goes on, and accessibility and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So
And
the-
accessibility sometimes can be a big one because you might have some place, it's land and all the rest of that. It's a nice piece of property. However, during the winter, the only way you're getting to it is by a snowmobile.
Yep.
As a buyer, that would be nice to know.
So is there land here in Wyoming that you cannot get water to and you'd have to drill too deep and there's no drilling to get water to that land?
So it's in a subdivision, but outside of Wyoming is a subdivision called Wild Horse Ranch,
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
right? Wild Horse Ranch,
Yes.
those don't have wells. 90,
No, but you
99,
can drill a well, right? It's right by the Lake Hattie.
I agreed, but the
Uh-huh.
water, there's such a high alkali content,
Yes, I heard
right?
about
So
that.
in the ponds over there that you see when they dry down, they'll be all white in the bottom,
Oh,
and that's all alkali. So you have million and a half dollar houses over there with people who have cisterns in the house,
you have to
and they're
pump
hauling
water in.
water. And that happens really on Highway 130 and 230 all the way out towards the
Yeah.
mountains in the flat belt.
Okay.
And that like that one doesn't count. That's why they
That
use-
water will never be potable.
No. And that's why I don't use that. So that one's in a subdivision. So this doesn't apply to it,
Mhm.
which is its own issue. But if you're a chunk of land out in the middle of nowhere, they gotta know whether they can get stuff to it.
Okay.
This is the addendum to that exclusive right to buy contract. So we just talked about that. You could add a property to it. You could do whatever. Just remember, adding addendum amendment is a change that you're trying to do to it. And I would say that you're probably using 98% of the time, you're using an amendment.
Amendment is change, extend is add.
Addendum is add, ADD.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah,
just remember that if you're gonna do an addition, you're gonna do an addendum. And I probably threw an extra D in there.
Oh, right. Okay.
So this is the addendum to the contract to buy and sell, same kind of thing. This used to be this big crazy one that was all blank. So it just gives you an ability to tie it and do an addendum. And this is language should still be on there, I believe. Use this form to add new information if changing existing information, use an agreement to amend or extend. Agreement to amend and extend still gives you all of these options to check on there, which I know I agree makes it easier. Remember that they're gonna initial that section Oh, this is not the right one. I apologize.
Initial up there where the lines are?
No, I apologize. Wrong form. I was
Okay.
thinking this one was the one that had the initials underneath it, but it's the counter offer. So use this form if you're going to change anything on it. Same kind of options were available for, and then other dates, and then anything else. So name change, anything, price change down here, closing cost payment changes, whatever you got in that section. Designation of agents. So this is again only if we are in the same brokerage making offers on property or sellers or buyers that are working together and they're both represented by the same thing, by us as the same firm.
Brokerage. Yeah.
So if it was the case, then we do what's called, and I don't know what Lana and you guys do, but we do what's called designated broker or designated agency. And in that designated agency form, you used to have a whole bunch of check boxes and a whole bunch of craziness. They've simplified the form. All the information that's required on it is on this form now. You just have to get it filled out and remember that each side has to do one.
Yeah.
Russ has to do one for his buyer. Kelsey would have to do one for her seller, and they would have to acknowledge and understand that they're still there working with the same brokerage. But you guys' responsibilities in terms of agency don't change.
Scroll down on that a little bit. Oh, look at some. Okay, so this is still something that client does not have to sign.
You know, they're supposed to acknowledge it, and I'm gonna leave it open as a question right
Well,
now.
I usually have my clients just initial it, so they're aware of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and read the statute because they supposedly did these by statute. It's the one thing that's missing in this one is a client acknowledgement.
That would protect you doing that because
yeah.
then nobody can say that I was never aware of that.
Oh,
Well, your
I
initials on
was
it.
taught that my first 2 weeks when I was in real
Uh-huh.
estate.
Right.
My original broker is that he always have the client at least initial it so that they acknowledge they know.
Right, no, and agreed. There just isn't a spot on it on the specific form, and there was on the old one for them to acknowledge. So I'll let you guys know about that one and give you an update on it.
So these things could still evolve.
Yeah, they're not gonna change very much until the next big one. They won't throw out little things. If you see anything that's in error in them, let us know and we'll get it up to the right people. Because there could still be errors in it. Your real estate brokerage disclosures did not change. There is a title at the top. Remember that there's one for the seller and there's one for the buyer because we like to make sure there's a form for each one as opposed to a checkbox or which one you're going to be in front of. And then remember, do not highlight or check any of these on this side. This is only a disclosure in terms of how they can be represented. They're not choosing a representation at this point. And when you see it come from other agents, yell at them, please.
Well, I'm guilty, but I'm not doing it anymore. But I was guilty.
Well,
before.
years ago, people were that was a standard of practice.
Uh-huh.
People, they would check it or highlight it or
Uh-huh.
whatever. And
Right.
but yeah, so I mean, but it makes sense. Yeah, don't do that because it's just
You're
this is what
responsible
the
really.
bill.
You're responsible for disclosing all of the designations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seller's estimated net proceeds and buyer's good faith estimate. I will just throw this out. So if you're using these hand forms, please make sure that you're updated all the time in terms of fees, all that kind of thing. They added in reference to contracts so that on a seller net sheet, if you had 6 of them, they would know which one applied to which offer. They also additionally added in extra lines if you're doing it by hand because
Yep.
people needed extra lines to be able to do it. My recommendation and our recommendation as a brokerage is still to use a title company net sheet or a title company buyer good faith or an LE.
It's more detailed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're just estimates, and we can tell stories a lot about people not taking them as just estimates and looking at it for detail and stuff. But yeah, just a recommendation on our part. You still got to provide them, and remember, if you do not provide them at time of offer and at time of receipt of offer, that your license can be censured
Yeah.
for that.
The only thing about that form I don't care for is the fact that you got to go grab all those numbers and you got to go fill them in or do the math or whatever. So
Agreed.
a lot of these, like the lender's disclosure, or the title company, I mean, it's all done right there.
Right.
You know,
First
like
American Titles is
or
pretty
like-
good.
yeah, and like the form I use, from Repro for SellerNet, I just got to plug some numbers in, boom, it does all the math.
Yep.
Everything's there.
And the only caveat I would give you is a reminder that if you haven't updated like the fees and all that kind of thing in it,
Yep.
and somebody looked and goes, "Hey Russ, you're doing this with bad or old information," so make sure that you're updating that.
Well, there's another section in that whole thing. You can go in and update what they're supposed to be.
Agreed. And the question
Transfers
isn't
over.
whether there's a place to update it. The question is,
Yeah.
are you updating?
Well, I have no idea. You know, as far as I know, at least in this brokerage, I'm the only person that uses this.
Agreed. But I'm asking, have you updated
But,
yours?
huh? Yeah,
So,
I do. If I know the fees like have changed and stuff, I go in and I change them. So they're automatically figured.
but, when I use the net sheet for First American Title, it's something that I have my buyer sign or proceeds, my
Sure.
seller sign. You're saying that if something changes in the middle of the transaction, you do another net sheet
Well, you have to.
and you have them sign it again
Well, initial it, but
or? Oh,
Well, so-
he's talking about if fees change over the course of time, like
what he's talking about is say there's a $225 fee. Okay, that's a title company's fee, right? So say that they change it and increases it to 40. Okay, that's something that's automatically going to be figured on the form that I'm talking about. And so I have another thing in mind where I can go in and I can actually change that, and then it automatically shows up on the net sheet.
yours is reflected already because the title company already.
Right. Right.
He's talking about a hand form that he has to update on his own.
okay.
To your point, if you make an offer, every offer has to have a net sheet with
Yep.
it.
Yep.
When it's received. If that offer would change and you're negotiating, Cameron, I think would tell you that you need to have a new net sheet for,
Oh, so you're
new fee.
saying the offer or the listing price is 355. Offer comes in at 362. Over ask because they want closing costs and they're kicking in
You
some
gotta
extra
change the
money.
net sheet.
You have to change the net sheet because
Yes.
it changes the whole
Yes,
purchase
it
price.
does.
okay, let's clear something up for just a second. So Wyoming statute, let's talk about just when you have the seller. So when we go do a listing agreement, I give Russ a net sheet, okay? I give Russ a net sheet that says, hey, look, on the price that we listed at with what our estimated closing costs are that we're gonna pay, whatever all that stuff is, here's a dollar amount you're gonna walk away with, okay? That is not required by Wyoming statute. That is because you're a good realtor and you're doing your job and you want your seller to know what that is. The Wyoming censure statute reads that you have to provide a seller net sheet at the time of the offer is made to you and received for every offer that you get. So that's,
For every offer.
if you get 10 offers and Cameron's position, and I don't think it has changed, but Cameron's position during COVID and during whatever was, if you got 15 offers or 20 offers, that you had a net sheet for all 20 offers. That you couldn't put it together in a spreadsheet, you couldn't put it together in whatever else you had, because the Wyoming statute says has to be a net sheet done at the time of every offer. And then same thing with your buyer's good faith estimate or whatever you're providing on that side has to be done at the time of offer. So you can't do a net sheet or a seller good faith estimate, make an offer today and then do one tomorrow and have it count.
Right.
Has to be done and presented, your buyer has to have it prior to the offer. So,
And realistically, if there are any major changes that are gonna affect what the seller's gonna get, you probably should do it.
well, it's a new offer. So every time you counter offer, right?
Well, yeah,
It's a
that,
new offer.
God, I'm doing counters right now and I haven't done one for every counter offer back and forth,
I'm not saying I do or I don't, but I'm saying that every time you make a counter offer, it's a new offer, right?
Mhm.
It's something that hasn't been accepted.
right?
So, and some of those are changing significantly right now. $10,000 in closing costs, 10 to 5, 5 to 2,
Yeah.
whatever the case is. Point buy
Yeah.
downs, 10,000, you know, so just know that this Wyoming statute requires that there's one done at the time of every offer. And then
And counter offers are off.
To charge more money. I need to charge more.
discount,
for my
discount,
services.
discount. They did touch the lead-based paint forms, just a touch. And all they did was tie it back into the contract if you're gonna do a 10-day period for assessment. So if you're gonna give them a 10-day period, it has to be reflected in the contract. Okay? And that's what both of those references are for, is if you're not gonna waive the 10-day opportunity, you can't have a 5-day inspection period and a 10-day inspection for lead-based paint.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Exclusive right to sell, all of the listing contracts now took out the city as well. You haven't had it in the purchase contracts forever, but now it's as opposed to Cheyenne, Wyoming, it's Laramie County. So situated in the county of Laramie in Wyoming and all ready to roll. This looks the same for us, except for it's I think it's on different lines. I think some of the lines kicked over a little bit before. Other people used to have little boxes in there. They would put in 2.5% or whatever the case is, and then the sellers would have to initial next to it.
Mhm.
You don't have to initial next to them anymore. It's just fill out your lines and do it. Remember, if you're going to pay sub-agents, then people can act as sub-agents for you and your seller. So make that choice as a conscious choice.
So would that be something, if you knew you were going on vacation in the middle of the transaction, that you could have somebody step in for you in case you don't have good reception where you're at or whatever? Is that
No,
what-
No,
No?
no.
so this sub-agency was prior to buyer agency. So prior to 95 in Wyoming, everybody worked for the seller. So if Russ listed the property and then I wanted to come help and bring a buyer to that, I was also working for the seller. Nobody was working for the buyer, and I would be a sub-agent for Russ and sub-agent for his seller that he had listed. So that's just how the structure worked, and I had no responsibility to the buyer at all.
Right.
I was only working for Russ's clients and in his best interest.
All right.
And then they decided in 95, somebody should take care of the buyers.
Yep.
Well, sub-agency didn't go away. You can still have it. But our philosophy on it is if I don't pay a sub-agent, then nobody will be a sub-agent.
That's right. Yeah.
Other brokerages, other cities, maybe one in Cheyenne, at least one I know of in Laramie, only pays sub-agents. They will not pay a buyer's agent, an intermediary, or if you're working with them as a customer. Only if you're a sub-agent for that agent.
Wow.
So I know, like on the old form auto, for sub-agents, it would always be checked no. On the new form, I would just cross that out.
Just don't check it.
Because,
Just
well,
leave it unchecked.
I would probably still just put a line out through it.
Okay, I was gonna say, you just put NA in the
Uh-huh.
box, in the lines,
Uh-huh.
because you can't line over anything that has a deal in it, and you'd have one little red floating line up there.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't check the box. I would check the boxes on whatever else you're paying,
Mhm.
and then fill out the section to the right. If you're not gonna check any boxes, then put NA or put lines through the ones on the right.
Yeah.
If you're listing, and I'm not gonna dig into this all the way, but if you're listing the old school way, use this section. If you're listing the way we have in the additional provision section, where you can do a cap and an up to percentage,
Uh-huh.
then you're gonna fill out these lines with boxes, I'm sorry, with lines or NAs and not check any of them. And then you're gonna go add the additional provisions in that we have.
That's what I did on my most recent one.
Okay.
Because they got lined out and I did the new clause
Okay.
on additional provisions.
Okay. And we'll talk about that on the day that we do listing contracts and stuff like that. They added in the check for seller financing, and then additionally in your forms, you have a seller financing form that gives you like basic details, and then it really ends up in saying lawyers will work out the rest, because that's where you end up. Broker compensation. Remember, if you're listing old school, this is the percentage you're taking, and then you're offering out whatever 2.5 or 3 that you're offering above. Remember, if it's the new way that we list, then this is going to be your take, 2.5% or 3% of the purchase price. And then in this other line right here, it's going to be that listing agent, I'm sorry, seller or listing brokers percentage for, I don't remember the way the line reads, for listing services only, buyer's agent fee to be determined in contract, I think is what it says. And you'll add that line in there.
Yeah, that's
What?
yeah.
So
Is
this
that?
contract, so this is, and the reason I didn't want to get into that, so is because I don't know how you guys list. So there is a way that we list, which is just for our services. And then the buyer's agent fee is to be determined on the other side, right? So we don't say, I'm gonna take 6 down here, and I'm going to give 3 out to each one of these. Sometimes we'll say, I'm going to take 3% in broker's compensation, rest of it for buyer's agent to be determined in purchase contract, not use any of these and line them out. And then we have a clause that says basically that our seller is willing to pay up to a capped percentage, but it's going to be dependent on offer and
Mhm.
negotiated in the purchase contract.
Yep.
So
Okay,
it gives us an ability not to necessarily say we're going to guarantee you 2 or 3. If you bring me an offer that's amazing, and I might pay 3%. If you're bringing me an offer that's asking for 10,000 in closing costs and 12,000 in repairs and all the other stuff, I may not want to pay you 3%. But then the seller gets to determine that.
Mhm.
So
well, the seller's gonna wanna keep more money, especially when they are paying so much out.
which is basically all of this basically means that they get to determine what they pay the buyer's agent
Yeah,
on the best net for the offer that they get. And not everybody's giving that option. We built in that option.
Yeah, it's a negotiation tool.
I like that.
Mhm.
I don't know if Lana will, but I like it for exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, we had lots of debate about it before the changes in September and stuff, and
Is it well accepted as something?
it is just one of those things that they don't really get a choice when you list that way.
So you know what's interesting is when the whole thing came down with NAR last year for the lawsuit, I was getting phone calls. Are you offering BAC? And now I don't even get it. It's just written in the offer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we just want 2.5%, and it's just written in the
Oh,
offer.
I-
No phone calls anymore. Is your seller offering compensation? That went bye-bye.
Right.
Yeah, and we even have an option where in the clause, you can actually check whether or not the seller actually wants to have that disclosed or not. So, and this actually happened to me like last summer when all this stuff was brand new and everything else, and I had all that conversation with the seller, and they actually decided, you know what, no, haven't put it in the offer. And so that's what happened. And I actually had an agent call, well, what are you offering? What's your seller offering? And I said, I'm not at liberty to disclose. I said, you can put it in the offer. And oh, this agent was furious with me, all upset and everything else. And so, but
So what happens in that scenario? Let's piggyback on your scenario. And the buyer's agent writes into the offer 3%, but seller's only willing to do 2.5. And now there's a negotiation between compensation.
The negotiation in the whole contract.
Yeah.
Right, but
It's all in the
so
purchase agreement.
where do you actually you would use a counter offer form in regards to compensation
Yeah.
also?
Yeah.
Okay.
you could, or the other option would be, so say your seller says, well, wow, this is $5,000 over asking and it's a clean offer, everything's good. He goes, yeah, I'm willing to pay that 3%. So now you don't have to do a counter offer or anything else, okay? But before your seller signs that, okay, you go through, okay, and you do an amendment and you have them change, okay, the listing contract where they said up to 2.5, okay, to where now they're willing to pay 3.
Right,
Then sign all the documents and boom, away you go.
right.
And you wouldn't have to have that. You could have the seller sign before. You don't have to do that.
Well, you could, but you should because it changes.
I'm just saying that agreement on the other side, I would get the contract signed first, and then worry about matching it up on the other side because that's a requirement.
Well,
Right.
I mean, that's semantics. You can do it one way or the other. That's how I would
No,
do
that's
it.
fine. Yeah, so lots of options and all negotiable, right? What came out of the settlement last fall, that there's lots of options there that people necessarily don't always consider.
Yep.
Okay. Kelsey must be driving to her closing so she can get some money.
Go, Kelsey, go.
Okay, broker compensation, same as it was before. Okay. They did take out the existing financing section. I will just give you my spiel for this and I will implore you, but even though they took this existing financing section out, make sure you're please still having the conversation, right? My thought is that to the point of the other forms that are there, you put them in front of somebody and you have to have the conversation. When it was in here, we got to this section and we said, hey, what's the loan that you have on the property? Do you have a second
Right, right.
loan? Do you
Yeah,
have whatever, right? Now that's not gonna be in the contract anymore. So do you still need to know what the loan is on the property,
Sure
if
you
there's
do.
a second on the property, if they leaned it to buy the tractor that dad's driving
How
out
are
the
you gonna
driveway?
do the net sheet without knowing that?
Agreed with all of it, but it's my little soapbox. Just please have the conversation. And then remember that, and then there's a couple other references down in here, that it's any lien that they have applied to the house.
Yeah,
If they had medical bills and they leaned the house for the medical bills 5 years ago,
includes chattel mortgage as well.
um,
Like, rent out your washers, dryers, refrigerators, stuff
no,
like
because it's
that.
not on the property, wouldn't be in this section. Would have to be dealt with.
Well, you still need to know.
No, that's okay, agreed, but just know that it's not applied to the. it's
So-
not applied.
I had a listing a couple months ago where drug treatment payment for a daughter was a lien
Lien
on the
against
house,
Uh-huh.
not told to, it was a probate. No one told us. We found out when we saw the title report come in, and there were 7 liens on the
Yeah.
property that
Yeah.
we did not know about.
Yeah.
So in that scenario, then you have to do another net sheet. Because that was all a surprise. We only thought there was 2 mortgages, ended up having 7.
Yeah,
Floods
well, it
to
changes
title.
their bottom line.
It
So,
does,
yeah,
it does, yeah. So that was ugly. That was ugly. That was very ugly.
Well, and just
But I got
remember
it
this,
sold.
this is just this isn't related to contracts, but remember that you can have a pre-listing commitment done. And all the title companies in Cheyenne, most title companies in the country will do it.
Yep.
But when I get ready to list a house, before I put it on the market,
yep,
I can go and say, hey, and this is a recommendation that we make for every property that we list, but you just go to the title company and say, I need a pre-listing
Yep.
commitment. Pull all the info, it's public information. Their typical is gonna, their expectation is gonna be that you use them for the title work and for the sale.
Oh,
Sure.
no problem.
Right.
I mean,
But that way you have a heads up on it ahead of time.
but so I didn't know you could do it free because
Yeah.
usually what I do is when I get the listing agreement signed, I immediately forward that to title so that they could start
Oh.
working on the title commitment before an offer comes in.
Yeah.
And then that way I get a heads up if there's something that I wasn't aware of, or if there's something on title that is ugly, an easement or a
Mhm.
encroachment or something.
Yeah.
well, so like, I do the same thing, and I have for years, a pre-list title commitment. And the reason I do that is before if I know I'm gonna be getting a listing, okay, even if I suspect I'm gonna be getting a listing, it leans real strong that way, I will go to the title company and I will pull a pre-list title. And the reason I do that is so that, one, I can review it real quick and see if there's anything in there that makes these little hairs stand up back here,
Yeah.
and also share it with my potential
Seller.
client, let them know that, hey, we got this. Are you aware of this?
Yes. Yeah,
Because then it could be something that might prevent them from being able to list the house until
Right.
those things are taken care of.
right. I
So-
didn't know you could do it
Yeah,
before paperwork.
absolutely, always do.
I talked with Kathy Tabor at Town Square Title. She said, do it upon your signed paperwork. She never indicated that I could do it pre-list.
Well, and I guess find that out because I
Okay.
don't know so all of what they're pulling is public record.
Mhm.
Yep,
So I think based on every title company, there may be a different time where they allow you to do it. But it's like I said, it's all public record. The problem is it's work they're doing that if you don't get the listing, they're not gonna get paid for, right? So I think the big thing there for them is maybe sign listing paperwork so that they know that somebody's got an order to get and they can get paid for it. But all of it is public record. So whatever's filed, whatever's done, because I can buy a subscription to iDoc Market, and I can go look and see what's filed at the county for every single property that's out there. So this mortgage, this lien, this easement, all of those kinds of things. So
Mhm.
yeah, so I don't think that it's a legal requirement, but double check. But it may be just because they want to make sure they get paid for the work. But yeah, as soon as you can get it, like if I know I'm getting it, I get it to them as quick as I can,
Mhm.
and then just let them pull. So
Okay. I always waited till I got listing paperwork signed,
Mhm.
and then I forward them a copy of the signed listing paperwork.
Yeah, and and the thing for me that it's trying to prevent is exactly what you're talking about, right? So we've had situations before where somebody had a second mortgage, WCDA, and they never said anything about it, right? They
Mhm.
said, yeah, it's an FHA mortgage, whatever, and you don't see it until that title commitment gets pulled and they see what's.
And it
leaving
changes the final
Yeah,
figure,
and we had,
15 grand or
we
something.
had one that had $85,000 in medical needs against it.
Uh-huh,
So, and we didn't know that, and they didn't know that.
right.
So it comes back with 85,000.
Changes the bottom line
Medicare,
tremendously.
128,000.
Right,
Yeah, so, yeah, it gives you an opportunity.
okay.
So that section's been removed. Seller shall pay the following additional closing costs in collected, certified, or available funds acceptable to you, the closing agent, and then they added in a definition of closing agent down in the definition section. All of those definitions now are applied to all the contracts as opposed to they were just existed in the purchase agreements that have been updated before. Closing agent's fee shall be paid, and they added this one in. So they used to have just split between buyer and seller evenly. They've added in each to pay their own. They've done that on all of the contracts. I believe that,
How is it different? Oh, evenly. Oh, it could be that there's another fee on one side, and if they're splitting it evenly, that means the seller's paying part of the buyer's X
right,
instead of each to pay their own. Is if there's an extra, the buyer pays for his extra automatically.
right. And the one thing that we've always had questions about here, and it's in some of the language now, and I'll show you where it's at, but buyers adding additional coverage or additional riders, right, for extended title coverage and those
And
kinds
then
of
the
things.
seller would have to
Split
pay.
part of that, and the seller's like, why am I doing that anyway?
Uh-huh,
And
uh-huh.
and honestly, all of this is optional as well, right? If our contracts are written such that the buyer pays for a title policy for the lender and the seller pays for a title policy for the seller or for the buyer.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's not written in Wyoming law or statute. It's written into our contract. So if the seller doesn't want to pay title insurance for the buyer, they don't have to pay it.
They don't have to pay for the owner's policy?
No. If you don't want to buy it, you can not buy it. I can also not buy your policy. You
Yeah,
can go buy your own title insurance.
yeah.
So our contracts create a lot of situations that we're in. I don't think that that's written into every.
Do you ever see it? Do you ever see it where a seller says, I'm not gonna pay for the
Yeah.
owner's You do?
I've seen it once in the last year at least.
Oh, once.
Not very often.
I've never seen it.
But
I mean-
so let me tell you this, and this is another deal that's off topic, and we'll get back on topic. But it depends on whether you tell somebody what that situation is, right? The way our contracts are written, I'm going through the contract and I say, this is the standard of practice in Wyoming. Standard of practice in Wyoming is that you sell. If I look at that seller and I go, the standard of practice in Wyoming is that you pay for a buyer's title policy, an owner's title policy. But you have the option to whether you say yes or no to it.
They're always gonna say, I don't wanna pay for
Yeah,
it.
and I'm down to
That's true,
1,000.
But that right there there's their fee.
I get it. I'm talking about the other section. When we're talking about just title fees in general, our language is written such that this is just the way it's written.
Well, true, but I don't want to, this is just like $225 that.
It's
First
not
American
necessarily though. It could be anything because it's not just title fee, right? Closing agent's fee shall be paid, right? But that closing agent's fee could be some other thing on there
What if,
because otherwise they wouldn't have added this in.
right,
And maybe it's not extended title coverage. Maybe it's remote notary fee for $150.
or additional,
Oh, well, yeah, and it could be,
That's what I'm saying. So they put this line in
but
because there could be additional fees on there.
yeah.
We just got on a different discussion.
Oh, okay, I was gonna say, because that line right there does not apply to, okay,
I
title insurance.
agreed, and I can't tell you exactly what it does or not. Let's say that there's additional research on one that they got. I don't know what their fees are.
or additional, notaries for,
Right.
LLC, trusts, this and that. Additional costs for that, mobile notary out of state for
Sure.
an out of state signing. What would you put in the other box?
Other whatever. Yeah,
Why?
I don't-
What would apply?
I don't even know.
I don't even know either.
So, but it makes sense because yeah, otherwise you're splitting all those evenly.
Yeah.
And we've been in situations where even First American Title, remote notary, West Coast,
Yep.
whatever the case
Yep.
is, $150, $175
Yep.
goes basically into their fee section.
Yes, it
So-
does. So, and just know, as a matter of topic on that right there, if you have well, this is for the seller. Okay, so never mind, keep going.
Okay.
This is a
So-
listing contract.
They added used to be a bunch of check boxes for all the fixtures that were included,
Mhm.
right? That's gone. So now you don't have to check air conditioning and ventilation and screen doors and
Why did they
window
take
doors.
it out? I thought that was good. It wasn't good? I thought it was good.
Really,
You didn't?
you want to check the antenna every single time or not? Or the storm windows, and there's 8 of them that have storm windows and 1 of them that doesn't. You want to line it, you want to have all that in the contract.
Well, I think,
Here's what I would say.
okay,
Price shall include all fixtures currently on premises with the following exception.
yes,
So what they did is they reversed it and they said, look,
just tell
Everything
us
that's
what
there.
you're not going to
exactly, right?
convey.
Yeah, and that way it's easier than checking all the things. And not everything was on those lists, right? And they weren't updated
That's
lists, they were
true.
old.
Right, it's
Yeah,
true.
for what it
It
was,
wasn't fully updated.
And then what they did is they put a section on here that says non-fixture items included in the purchase price. So other things like the place set in the backyard, whatever, because this is a listing agreement. And you're not doing a bill of sale at this point, because we don't do them on this side in Wyoming. But it gives you the place to put that list. And then my caveat for you is just remember that if you get to being over a $500 item, it probably should not be on there for what you're doing with it. And then you take that section and that's what you go upload into MLS.
So what if it is why if it's over $500, would you not put it in there?
So once you start doing things that are $500 and above,
Uh-huh.
you start getting into a territory where it may affect value and the underwriters may kick it back.
But it's a non-fixture.
Right,
Oh, so you shouldn't have it in the contract in the first place,
right.
like a barbecue.
Like a huge barbecue. Like if it was $1,000, $1,500, if it's a $1,500 lawn tractor, if
Sure.
it's a truck, whatever the case is. Because when you start transferring those with the real estate, now it starts to be something that affects value.
Right.
And it's not just an assumed, hey, this house is gonna come with it, like appliances and that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, that's a whole nother conversation, but typically just things outside of appliances, we typically recommend not anything that's over $500 value on here. And if you had two $500 values on there, I'd tell you probably do it outside of the contract. If I was gonna do it.
So how would you do that?
Bill
What-
of sale on the contract outside the contract. Outside the contract to buy and sell real estate.
Is there a form like that?
Nope, that's a lawyer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a lawyer.
Okay.
The other thing they added back in is propane.
Yeah.
Okay, so was in there forever, was negotiable in there forever, and then they took it out. And now it's back in. If there's propane in the tank on the premises, it goes with the sale. Unless you change it in additional provisions or do whatever. The caveat that I would give you is if it is a leased tank and you want the propane that's in it, probably you're gonna have to assume the lease on the tank.
Mhm.
Not gonna have to go buy a tank, not gonna be able to switch providers, that kind of thing. If those are those situations and they come up, just make sure to address them, because right now, the propane that's in the tank, if it's 1,500 gallon tank and they just filled it up, that's going with the sale of the property.
And that's a lot of money.
Yep.
Yep, it happened to me last summer. 1,000-gallon tank, same thing. They filled it up. I was like, oh, I wish you would have told me. I would have said, don't fill it.
Right, well, and
It
yeah,
owns the tank. And it was still half a tank, but he filled it. I'm like, oh,
because people just run through their same routine.
yeah,
Right.
that was it.
And that's one of those things that's been coming up on and off. And again, most of these changes or adjustments have been in response to things that have occurred.
Mhm.
And propane has been an issue.
Yep.
They added in how you can own it currently, which is the Wyoming way, a married couple of tenants by the entirety, which is the survivorship piece of it. You could own by husband and wife before, but it didn't have survivorship listed on here, which is what that version is.
Well, married couple also now addresses fair housing. Because you can be a married couple and you're not necessarily husband and wife.
Fair,
Yep,
fair. And then there were some, and that is probably true. That's probably
Yep.
one of the reasons.
I
that
think
got
you're
changed.
right.
Possession shall be delivered to buyer. So this one used to have a line in it that give you, as you're listing it, said basically, when possession was gonna be and when closing was gonna be or whatever. And it was a line that we would just typically write at closing in the line, right? And then you wouldn't mark out the rest. So possession shall be delivered to buyers mutually agreed in writing between buyer and seller. And then it just added in the closing definition, which is the same one we've been using in the purchase agreements for the last 3 years, which is either recorded or accepted documents and proceeds are available to the
So
seller.
hold on, for B there, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
I got an offer on a listing 2 days ago and they put in a date for possession, which is the close of escrow date, and a time. But they also had put in additional provisions, the automatic extension for 15 business days if it was a lending issue. What happens if doesn't fund on time on the day of close, it funds the next day because let's say it's an East Coast lender.
Yeah.
Can the buyer say, well, it says I take
They already have the
possession?
agreed upon extension in there, correct?
Well, hang on for a second though. She's asking a different question.
Uh-huh.
So in the additional provisions part or whatever they added in, so they did a date for closing and you said they did a time. I'm sorry, for possession and time or
Yes.
closing and time?
For possession shall be on the close of escrow date, and they put a time in, like 5 p.m. But what happens if it doesn't fund and
So that's what I would do. So close of escrow to me,
Mhm.
I would probably counter that back. And if she's gonna do it, I would put at time of closing. Because the contract defines closing at time funds are available to you.
Yes.
not at the signing table,
Right.
because this is a table funding state.
So it's not, I don't see it in this new one, but I will tell you in the other contracts, I don't even put a time and date in there.
I don't either. I
write in
never
there as
have.
fully funded closing.
A fully funded closing makes no difference because it defines closing. The closing is defined as the date that the paperwork is filed or accepted and funds are available.
I put that in possession.
But I'm just saying, that's what I'm saying. So closing, if you're gonna do it, and this is why you might separate it. So if they've separated it, then I would make sure, because I could separate and say, here's my closing date, here's my possession date. And we used to write at closing or fully funded closing or whatever in there. The problem with that was that closing required the funds to be available. So what if I don't put at closing on possession? What if I say, here's the date I'm gonna close, and I want possession on this date and time? If I don't counter that back, I probably am giving possession at this date,
Right.
whether I have funds available or
That's
not.
right.
That is my exact
So
point.
exactly.
And this is what I just talked about with my client last night.
Yep.
Exactly that, and I countered it.
So I would just clear it up.
I cleared it up in the
Yeah.
counter, for that reason, because I said, what if the loan hasn't funded? And so this person happens to have somebody who's pregnant, like the wife is
Yeah.
pregnant. What if they take possession? She falls down the stairs. She's not the owner of the house yet. And then she turns around and sues you.
Yeah, and all of that gets a little bit messy in
It
there.
does.
And
I mean, that's a messy scenario.
and until it gets played out in court and what they were, there'd probably be
Mhm.
lots of other things going on. But I do agree that you have to pay attention
Mhm,
to what that section is,
mhm.
and how it's defined. We just used to put, there used to be a line there for a date and a time, right when we're listing the property, and we're like, well, I don't know. So we would
You
write,
don't know.
we would
TBD.
write at closing
Or,
yeah, or whatever the case is.
Mhm.
So it just says now mutual agreement. Because the other thing that used to happen is, people always wanted to do close on or before. Well, there was no mutual agreement in there, so maybe
Uh-huh.
one side could push and say, well, you know what, I'm ready to close. We're gonna close Friday. If you can't close Friday, then I'm gonna move on to the next offer that I have. Right? So you have to think about repercussions that way in terms of the language.
Mhm.
But yeah, I would just clear it up like you did,
Mhm.
Yep.
like whatever Lana told you to do. Because I can't give
Well,
advice.
I know, but Lana's very hands-off. She's very hands-off, and I love that about her. It's usually me who brings questions up to her as opposed to her telling me how she wants me to do things.
Fair.
She tends to really like the way I do things, because I'm much more thorough than a lot of people in our office.
I love that
So-
Kelsey's in a closing, still listening to us.
Got her butt in probably.
So awesome. Do a little dance. Come on, Kelsey. Do a little. you're listening, I can't wait to have this conversation afterwards. Just remember that the long form disclosure for property disclosures in the state of Wyoming, it does not exist anymore in your Wyoming state forms. There's only the short version in there. Please make sure that if you're gonna have it submitted or do it, that you check those boxes, let them know. If it got missed, make sure you go back and adjust it, whatever the case is.
Yep.
Reworded a little bit about earnest money and that kind of thing, but it was just language cleanup in there, as far as I know. Fair housing, I think this used to say mentally disabled, and now says mental disability to match up with the fair housing language.
Yep. And
Seller hereby directs, this is kind of a part with the mortgage stuff taken out above. Just remember that you have to have all of any note, lien, security agreement, financing statement, other encumbrance secured by the above listed property, all to them, to the broker, the amount owing on said encumbrance and other terms. All of that stuff has to be provided. They added in all of the definitions that used to exist in the
did something change in the definitions because it's been there for a while?
they didn't, so they weren't in the listing contracts before. They were in the purchase agreements,
Okay, gotcha.
and now they're all added into the
Gotcha.
listing.
Okay,
agreements.
gotcha.
When they had done the update 3 years ago, they only updated purchase agreements. They didn't do the listing
Yeah,
agreements.
you're right. You're right.
And then you're gonna need some kind of mortgage verification, right? We're not getting that information before, and any HOA or COA.
What do you mean, like
documents
just a
that-
copy of the most current mortgage statement? Would that satisfy?
I would, yeah. So if it's got a current balance on it, if it's got, the fact that it's. current.
What, is there a specific form they're looking for, mortgage verification?
Like
They
just
don't
a
have a full-
mortgage, a current mortgage statement.
Well, it says addenda attached,
Agreed,
and
anything
it
that would
says
be, anything,
mortgage verification.
right, but I mean, preliminary title commitment is on here as well. And that can change based on company and whatever.
Well, preliminary titles, regardless, they don't tell you what the actual balance owed is. They tell you the amount of the original loan.
Agreed,
So,
100%, I'm just saying.
but how do you do that? If you check mortgage verification, it is supposed to be attached. How are you doing that?
Okay, how is it attached if you add this? Evidence of authority. It just needs to be included with the contract.
You just
So
sent
you're
it
not
along.
attaching it specifically. No checkbox do you check at the bottom of any one of our contracts. Gives you an ability to.
Okay, I get all that. I'm just saying.
So
what
I
are
would
you
get a
doing?
document.
What are you doing for
I
that?
don't have a specific. And I would take and get what you need. So any form that they can provide you, even if it's a snapshot of a screenshot of
Oh, okay.
an account or whatever.
That's fine.
But if it's gonna be up to you to find what they owe, what their payment is it current? All the things that you need to know.
So, and that's basically, that's putting you as a listing agent on notice that if they have a mortgage, you need to verify the conditions of it.
Same thing as always, right? You were
Yeah.
always responding,
Yeah.
you're doing a
Well-
net sheet based
Well,
on
yeah,
the information. they give
Exactly.
you.
So that's how I do that. So,
Would you always check that if they had a mortgage, and would you always check that mortgage verification? And I'm asking because, title does send you a payoff demand.
Right.
if they,
So they would get the mortgage verification to the dollar, right?
Yeah, at the end.
yeah, once you go under contract, and
So do
everything
you
else,
have to- do you
they're gonna, at some point during the term of that contract, they're gonna ask the seller to do a payoff authorization.
Right?
And then they get that from the.
But
mortgage
what
company.
about, do you have to check that box?
So here's
on
what
the
I will,
form?
here's what I will tell you. There is no requirement
Okay,
that there's mortgage verification provided right there.
okay. So-
It's just an option that's added in because it wasn't there before.
Mhm.
Yep,
And I've told people that I think the reason that it was added in is because they took the mortgage stuff out of the first part of the contract. And somebody
Which
goes,
makes
well, hey,
sense.
maybe we should, since we're not requiring that information anymore to be filled out, maybe we should give somebody an option. Because technically anything that's checked down there is supposed to be part of the whole entire package. when you-
It's sent, yep,
Yeah,
So,
right.
it would just tell you that you know and that you're looking for it and that you have it. Is it the right thing to do for the agent or for whatever? Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. Just an example of each one of these forms having a brokerage firm below, which will fill in and then just having you sign as opposed to having the broker fill it out.
Yeah, and that mortgage information I always get, and if it exists, I always get it in my pre-list worksheet anyway. So I have it. That's not part of the contract, but it's something where I just have, we go through and boom, boom,
Well,
boom.
to
So-
your point, right? You got to know because you're doing net sheets and those.
Well, yeah, because you can't do a net sheet without it.
Your customer disclosure agreement. You used to have one line right here for customer. Now they've added two more. They realized that there was a lot of times more than one person trying to buy a house.
Cool.
That's the only change there. Real estate brokerage disclosure, nothing changed on them except for last fall in September 15th, which is that it does not say, does not require a written agreement right here anymore, right? Because we have the customer disclosure.
Yep.
Just they took that out of there. So here's your buyer agency agreement. I told you that they added this language in or tweaked it a little bit, but there's your for professional services language again. Please have the conversation. Please, please, please. Make sure they understand it. Disabled to
Yeah.
disability. Brokerage firm.
Not much new in that one.
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So.
Good faith estimate, same thing. They added in a couple more slots. And in this section, they basically say the same thing, that it's an estimate and that it's all ready to go.
I never use that form. I always use the one from First American
Yeah,
Title
yeah.
because I think it's the best one. And I think it's the fastest. When I'm like writing up an offer at 10 o'clock at night, it's fastest to do the First American Title than to do that one.
Yep. Perfectly good with that. Did that in a preparer section as well. So you can do it.
And do you notice that First American Title does say prepared by Denise Van Dory at the bottom?
Yep.
So it prints it out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Contracted buy and sell real estate or contracted buy and sell real estate financed. So they cleaned this up a little bit. So it used to have another section down here, another line down here that was open, but buyer delivers whatever the earnest money is to the broker working with the buyer, which is also considered the selling brokerage, right? So whatever dollar amount that is, I'm sorry, whatever brokerage it is. So it should autofill for you. I don't know how you guys do it, but for us, it should autofill once we get all the forms
I have to type it in.
loaded in the templates.
Yeah.
There, just know that there is a way with dot loop to have all of your autofill stuff done. So
I do autofill whenever I can. I love it.
so there.
So I go into view details and I fill out all the stuff
Yep,
before, and then it populates everything. It'll ask me, do you want autofill? And I say yes.
And anytime it's you as the agent or whatever,
Mhm.
you can have it do your firm, all that kind of stuff as well. You don't have to type that stuff in. So our options available to do it. Other than that, this didn't really change except for this line. So you're gonna give the money delivered to the listing brokerage firm. Such funds shall be deposited in their trust account or an escrow account with, and then you put a funds holder in there if that was the case.
Mhm.
Yep.
So if it's going to first, or number one properties, whatever,
Mhm.
you're gonna put it in there, and then I would line this one out.
Mhm.
For us, for you guys, whoever your title company is here, and then you're done in that line.
Mhm.
Remember that purchase is contingent on financing was orphaned between the two forms before.
Yeah.
It was on the cash one and on the finance one.
It was a checkbox.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
not anymore. This one has it on it because it's financing. The cash one does not have it anymore. So they cleaned up that orphaned language. They did leave everything else on here, so please fill it out in terms of what kind of financing you have. Reworded a little bit and tweaked, but basically the same thing. Appraiser inspections may not come in the same time frame. There is one thing, and that is that this is required, and I know we get lazy with our contracts. We assume that since it's listed in the MLS as going FHA or VA, that the seller is gonna pay whatever those repairs are, because they listed it as going that way. We typically get an appraisal, get an email that's either coming from a lender or sometimes from the appraiser giving us a heads up. We send that over to the listing agent and go, hey, here's the repairs that need to be done. Nobody signs off on them. Nobody commits to having them done. Nobody does anything. It's just sort of this de facto way that we've been doing business.
Yeah,
The contract actually says that the buyer shall immediately provide a copy of any lender required repairs to the seller on an addendum with explanation of proposal of which party is responsible, and the buyer and seller shall mutually agree upon the responsible party for any required repairs in the addendum to the seller.
so honestly, appraisal repairs that are called out aren't automatically the responsibility of the seller.
They are not, they have to be
Based
mutually
on that.
approved.
Yes, yes.
We still battle it a little bit, because
Yeah.
if you're gonna list it that way,
Yeah,
And
I'm probably gonna pressure you to say, look, you listed it that way, you knew it was that
it
way.
was fun doing the transaction with you. It was fun. I did have fun with you, but, okay.
So again, it's not something that is written into stone, it's
Mhm,
because of our contract,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
So it's the same thing like if I want to switch funding at the top. I give you a cash offer, you respond to me and say, okay, cool, I'll take it. Halfway through the transaction, I decide that the money is free right now. Let's say we're at the 2.5% interest rate or whatever. And I changed it over and I say, nope, I'm gonna go FHA. I can get a better interest rate. Don't have to do whatever. Or I go VA, no, whatever. I've got a waived funding fee. I got whatever going on.
Mhm.
The only rule is that I can't cost you any money,
that's right.
right? I can't cost you
That's
anything additional or
changed.
delay you. And
Yes.
that hasn't changed. That's always been the same.
No, now, well, now, what was the
Always the
change?
same.
No,
So,
now there's a change with the VA that, you can actually, as the buyer, pay for something where,
Oh, you can pay for your realtor.
you can pay your
Realtor fees.
compensation to
That's
your
it.
realtor.
where
Yeah.
before you weren't able to.
They said no. They said they would say no. I don't know if I ever saw it because the market always was paying.
And remember that came out last summer with the
Yeah.
lawsuit too.
Yeah.
So now VA's allowing it.
Yeah. And like I said, I never saw it go to court or do anything. Yes, that was the statement made.
Mhm,
The realtors were just allowing them to be paid all the time.
mhm.
Because I would have loved to have seen a challenge by a VA buyer that got turned down for a house because they were going to pay compensation. Because I don't think that would have lasted in court for 2 seconds.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
Because you're going to tell me I don't have the right to pay someone to service me,
right,
to take care of something I need done,
right,
but you'll let me pay the lawyer,
right,
you'll let me pay all these other people,
right.
and now it's my house.
And I don't have representation
Right.
or what,
So I would have loved to have seen, but of course that never went to court. But yeah, now they said it's cool.
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
cool. But yeah, so anyway, just when you're doing it down here, when you know it, um, for what you got, it is. Oh, so, well, if buyer agrees to accept and can qualify for terms other than above loan, the approval of the seller shall not be required, provided seller incurs no additional expenses as a result thereof. So probably can't delay the contract, can't have them charged anymore. So now FHA repairs or VA repairs might automatically. What's up, big guy? How are you? You can come in and say hi. Oh, you look at Aaron and say, can I say hi to Sean? How are you, buddy? Are you working hard today?
Oh, hey.
Yeah?
Hi.
Slaving away? You gotta tell her, man. We need to work out a pay schedule.
I
Yeah?
don't know what that is.
Okay, you and I should talk.
Mom's over there, go.
Are you out of school? No? When's your last day?
Wednesday.
Wednesday this next week? You gonna do something fun on your last day?
Field
Yeah.
day.
Field day?
Yeah.
I used to love going to see the kids at field day.
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta have it.
In the first grade graduation.
Uh,
In showing education. The talent show. You're in second grade.
Did you have second?
But you gotta,
First
but you
grade.
gotta watch the talent show? You don't have to perform in the talent show?
No.
I was thinking of it, but then I'm like, no, damn.
Right. That's okay. One of these days you'll be like, talent show, bring it on.
Yep.
Well, a bunch of other people in my class are doing it.
Oh, see?
Like a girl named Elena is doing the piano.
Yeah? Do you know how I sound when I play the piano? Ding, ding, ding. That's it. I don't know how to do anything else. No, for sure. But what do you got planned for the weekend? Anything fun? No. How long are you working with mom?
All day.
Oh my God.
We're headed to Colorado right now.
Going to show?
Yeah.
Nice. Very nice.
You could
pound a sign into the ground.
Could you? Could you be my helper? No.
I lost my
Wait,
hammer.
is there an option for me not to?
So he's gonna go hang out with Paka and Mimi,
Oh,
my
nice.
parents, for a couple minutes. It's kind of on the way. So
Very cool.
well, I go through the showing and then we'll jet back.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. You stay out of trouble today then? All right. Give me one of these.
Bye, guys. Have a good
Drive safe, Baron. See you, buddy.
Yeah, I know. I was
I know.
I was gonna give that to you, but then, oh, this is one me down. So,
It's all good. Somebody can skip that section. Okay, so in closing costs, they did talk about extended title insurance coverage, which is why maybe there's an additional fee to process some of that.
Yep.
Like I said, all of that I don't know about. So, but just be aware of it because you may see different things coming over in the contracts. The other thing is that any cost of repairs, seller agrees, and I think I heard this from you before that you were using some of the closing cost stuff to also apply to
Yes.
repairs that were done. I
Well,
would say, heck no,
well,
because I want them debated somewhere else, but it could be in the contract.
it's been written into contracts before when I'm the listing agent. So an offer comes in, closing costs, prepaids and concessions. Or closing costs, prepaids or rate buy down.
Rate buy downs, we've had,
No.
yeah.
But it said or. So this is what, so let me ask you, this is perfect.
No, or and, yeah.
No, it says or.
No, that's what I'm saying. The or and debate is
It-
people things mess up all the time.
Yes, you can't just say or, because what you're saying is that
This or the
money
other.
will go either to rate buy down or closing costs and prebays. It says or.
And we've had this discussion before. When you write things in additional provisions, you have to be really, really careful because there has been people that have used and or before, and it cost them $5,000, $10,000 based on numbers that were in there. And it was a legal definition that says, hey, you said this one or that one, not both,
Right?
wasn't to be included for both or used for both. And
Right.
I would clear it up in response, in counter, and say the same thing. I want to know, what are we really paying for? Right?
So that
Because like
should
at the
be,
beginning of buy downs, everybody said closing costs and prepaids. And there was a huge debate about whether buy downs were part of closing costs and prepaids. And they probably aren't, definitionally. Definitionally, they're not.
right?
Now, normal closing costs, though, at the top does say, if you're gonna buy points,
Mhm,
they're included.
mhm.
So then the debate became, is this just like buying points? It's a variation of it.
It
Because
is.
you really are buying points for year one and year two and and
That's
the
what
other-
you end up paying the lender.
right? So the
Points.
debate ended up kind of being that it was all really probably included originally, but
Uh-huh.
we changed our language and said closing costs, prepaids and buy downs, right?
But if you put or, I think that's the wrong language.
It
Because
definitely did.
words
the
matter.
problem- And the problem with this is that that is probably true.
Mhm.
It probably wasn't their intent. And are you gonna sue them?
I'm not gonna sue him. I'm not gonna sue him, but I'm also not going
Are you gonna not
to,
honor that part of the contract and get sued? And let somebody else debate it out, right?
I don't really want to ever be sued.
Agreed. So,
24 years, I've never had a lawsuit, and thank God for
no,
that.
100% agreed. It's just the point being that none of those mean anything until they get challenged in court.
You're right.
But we put ourselves in situations because we don't pay attention to the language when we do it. So this leads into a little segue for our provisions, and that just says, look, if you write something, we have a set that are approved that you don't have to get permission to use. But if you write anything outside of those, we have to approve them because I need a second set of eyes on them.
Yeah,
That says, look,
to make
just
sure.
read it. What was your intent?
Mhm.
What does it really kind of come across to me as? And is there something that provides liability for the brokerage?
So let me ask you this, if you have it written in that $10,000 for seller to pay up to $10,000 towards buyer's closing costs, prepaids, or rate buy down, If, let's say, closing costs and prepaids only come to 7,500, there's an extra 2,500. If you say, well, you said or, so you're going to use the money towards closing costs and prepaids, that $25,000 or $2,500 will go back to the seller.
I would battle for it based on language, right? But if you keep pushing me, it's probably gonna have to go to court. That's the part that sucks, right?
Yeah,
You can debate all day long what's right and if that's the definition. And I learned it up, looked it up in Webster's and I Googled it and I did whatever. But bottom line is, if I'm gonna tell you you can't use it and not let you, and you sign the contract, I'm gonna maybe push it. And maybe there's an intent thing. Maybe it's not exact letter of the law. Maybe the judge is feeling generous at that. I don't know. I don't know how it turns out.
mhm,
So watch your language, to your point. Watch what you're putting in and what the repercussions of that might be.
Yep.
And then bottom line is if it went to court, you're probably gonna lose. Probably can't use it for both because you gave a definition of I want it for this or that, whichever
Mhm.
one. Now I
mhm.
gotta pick. So again, it just leads into other things. That's why we're not lawyers. That's why we don't write like all the clauses that we have written, wherever we got them from and whatever language we put together, we have them approved by a lawyer that says, hey, look, so I can go in and I can copy and plug those in, but if I change anything, I have to get approval for it,
Right.
for what it is. So yeah, no, it's a great call. The example we use when we talk about additional provisions is always and or in terms of a dollar amount or a percentage.
Always
Right.
and or, because if you just put or in, that means you're making a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and you
This
don't,
or that.
and you don't even have to put or, because what the one we were talking about is one says, blank this percentage or this dollar amount, and then you let somebody pick. Well, I'm going to pick the whichever one's less. If the 2,500 is less than the 3% based on
That's
the
right.
price,
Right,
right? So why fill both of those lines out
right,
and give somebody the option to do it?
right.
Because somebody was mad, they're like, well, they only paid me $3,000. I'm like, well, that's all you asked for.
That's right. Right.
So, yeah, no, good stuff. But yeah, so just really watch what they're asking for in these sections, because there is another line in there, right? And then above other now is seller agrees to pay in this agreement or addendums, which could be the inspection contingency addendum, right? Because the inspection contingency notice can be an addendum or an amendment.
Wait a
For what it
second,
is.
that's bad.
I-
That's bad.
Well,
Because the seller is signing the contract, they're agreeing to all the repairs in the inspection contingency notice.
That caught my attention too.
That's
okay.
bad because there might be things that they say, all right, wait a second. For 2 smoke detectors, I'm not paying this electrician $355. I'll go to Menards and get 2 and leave them on the counter for you.
Well, and
Well-
I'm telling you that we're gonna probably be lining this out a lot.
Oh, so you strike it out? You
I would.
strike through it?
Sure,
Yes.
yeah, I would.
Yeah,
Because
because I don't like that line, seeing that.
So, and this would only be if there was extra money in here, right? So let's say,
at the time of offer,
what's that?
at the time of offer,
Yeah, and I don't know where the time bound part of it would be.
but I don't know. I don't like that line.
Nope. I mean, it's the same thing when you see
So,
a roof
The
clause.
only
So-
saving grace on this for me would be any cost repair sellers agrees to pay for in this agreement, stop. Okay, because if, okay, it says that agrees to pay for in this agreement. So when you have your inspections done, okay, you go through resolution, okay, and the seller says, yes, I'll pay to have A, B, C, D repaired, okay, that's gotta be on that inspection
Which is
contingency.
a different
Okay,
agreement.
but it becomes part of this contract.
Yeah,
but regardless,
So-
they have to agree. You're not gonna, just because there's dollar amounts requested on other forms, doesn't mean you have to pay them. They still have to have an agreement
Oh,
to
well, yeah,
whatever it is.
and so, but on its face, I'm just trying to justify that line.
They just-
I don't like that line.
Yeah, I think it looks scarier than it is, but it just means that if you're gonna talk about closing costs,
Yeah.
that's a closing cost, right?
Well, yeah,
Does it really matter on a seller in terms of closing costs? Probably not.
Yeah.
Right? It just says that, look, you're gonna pay this and anything else you agree to on any other addendum, which guess what? That's what we do every single time.
oh, yeah. So,
Now, I think people are gonna freak out about it, which is why I say that I'm probably gonna end up lining it out, because people will say, well, I don't wanna pay any extra. And I tell them, you wouldn't pay anything that you wouldn't agree to normally. And they go, well, why is it in there then? And I go, okay, cool. Because I don't care,
yeah,
right?
So, I mean, you're gonna negotiate it anyways in the inspection
Yes,
contingency
yes,
notice, so
yes.
don't agree to everything up
But
front.
you're not agreeing to it there up front, because it still has to be an agreement by the parties, right?
Well, but it says
Oh.
any cost of repairs.
That the seller
Agrees
agrees
to
to pay.
pay for in this agreement
If I
and,
don't agree to pay, I
right,
don't, they're not gonna
That's
come in
right.
here. And if I do agree to pay them, this is either referencing the same thing or this, and then look at the inspection
Yeah.
contingency notice. to look
because,
at.
because the bottom line is any forms that you do after acceptance of this contract, okay, it becomes a part of that agreement.
Agreed. And it
So-
just, for whatever reason, they're referencing it in the closing cost section and just saying, look, the seller shall pay the following closing costs. That's what it is. And then it says collected funds, available funds, whatever, to do it. So I guess you couldn't pay in cows to have the inspection contingency done.
I don't know about that. It's
I
negotiable.
don't know, it's
It's all
negotiable. Hey,
I'm just saying,
I've seen weird stuff before.
if it was acceptable to the company, then it would probably be okay.
Oh, yeah, how would Lana get her split? She would
Take the-
take it- she
take the
would
hind
take it
quarter.
grist-
Take the hind quarter.
Skin and fillets, right?
Yeah, anyway, so they added the line in, how it's gonna play out, I don't know for sure.
So you don't really need to strike it out. If the seller has to agree, you don't have to strike
What
it
I, what
out.
I, what I told Russ is, the reason I say that is because if I explain it to somebody and they go, well, I don't. I
No,
wouldn't-
I'm not gonna agree to that.
And then I explained to them, look, it would only be something you would agree to pay normally.
right,
And if it is, it's just referencing it here. And then they would say, so do I really need it? And I say, no, it's fine, I would scratch it.
Okay.
ditto,
And then I get to the next part and go,
yeah,
okay, are you gonna
And then
agree?
they feel like they've won,
Yeah.
right?
yeah.
So
Even though it's the
honestly-
same, even though it's the same
Yeah.
thing.
Exactly. So I honestly don't know. And we'll probably go through this and somebody will come up with an example sometime where it fits it and it really should be there. And I go, oh, that makes sense. But yeah, right now, I don't think it does anything. It's only what you've committed to anyway. So it's not committing you to anything more than you would pay at the end of any other transaction. It just says it goes to that section. So I think it is what it is.
Well,
But we may see
yes, it
other
is.
stuff. And they did add in each to pay their own on this one as well. Same thing as in the listing contracts, they do fixtures currently on the premises. If there's any exclusions, non-fixture items in the purchase price, again, we limit those to $500 or less typically if it's not appliances. And then propane in there. We used to have this is the same kind of as it was before, but in the title insurance commitment to buyer no later than, and it's got a date and or 5 business days after mutual acceptance, so you can put 10 days or whatever the case is in there. And then for them to pay for it, they have so many days after the receipt of the title insurance commitment and exceptions. Then they can challenge it or do whatever. The big change in here is the merchantable title. We used to have a little slot and we used to have to put a days in there, 3 days, 5 days, 10 days for merchantable title. We all kind of put 5 days, hoping that if it didn't get reconciled in 5 days, that they would just fix it. But it makes more sense. And they just said, hey, look, it just needs to be merchantable by the time it's closed. So it makes a little more sense to do that. They added in, so we've always had to have discussion about mineral rights and those kinds of things. I think the mineral rights language got reworked a little bit here, but they did add in additionally pore space and fossils that were not in there before. Same speech I gave before.
Souls.
Same speech I gave before, which is for mineral rights in the state of Wyoming, if you have not reserved them on the deed by whatever a lawyer, anybody prior to, and you own them, when you transfer the property, you will transfer the mineral estate with it.
That's very interesting that it says that the fossils are a part of the surface estate when you would think fossils you have to dig to get.
A lot
And
of
that
them are
would
laying
be,
a lot of them are laying on the surface out in western Wyoming.
really?
Yeah, because it's exposed rock and exposed space where a lot of those are seen, because you don't have to dig a lot of dirt. If you go Alcova all the way down over to the Red Desert in western Wyoming, there stuff like that. There's big places where they're just pulling them right off the face of the rocks and
Wow.
stuff like that. But you're right, it's a consideration for what it is. The mineral estate hasn't really changed. Mineral estate's the same way. If you have it and you sell on this piece of paper, you sell the mineral estate with it. If you don't have it, you don't sell it. And you are not an expert in it in any way, shape, or form. You have to get a landman. Landman,
Yeah.
same thing as a landwoman. They're called landmen too, apparently. But you just go through the deal, and they are the only ones that can be able to determine what you got going on. Property being transferred, always, worried about your water rights. So well water, ag well, any kind of riparian rights along the rivers, any kind of irrigation shares or sections or something like that, like up in
Mhm.
Torrington.
Mhm.
So you'd have to dig into those. And then pore space is new. Pore space is the open space between things in the ground, right? It's coming to avail because of uh, carbon sequestration and those kinds of things, where people are leasing that pore space to deposit carbon into to keep it out of the environment. And there's two different versions in here. If you read through here, the one says the English version, which I don't know why they put in, but the English rule vests the pore space with the mineral estate, which is the minority view, and the American rule vests the pore space with the surface estate and is the majority rule in the United States and Wyoming. So if someone has a lease for the pore space on the property, it will transfer with the surface estate typically. Now, it doesn't mean that it's 100% accurate right now. Doesn't mean that it's been challenged in court or anything. It's the current interpretation of what's there. So if somebody comes to you and says, I've got a pore space lease, what it is, you're going to talk about that transferring just like a lease on an apartment building or something like that for what it is. To your point, fossils, if the fossils are there, they're on the surface and that kind of thing. The only other thing I'll throw in here, which they haven't thrown in yet, is wind rights. And that is that wind rights are inseparable from the surface estate in the state of Wyoming. So if somebody has a lease for the wind turbines to be on them, that wind rights part of it goes along with the surface lease and that kind of stuff that's in there. And then remember that this kind of stuff can affect even lending on property.
Yep.
So let's say that you have a surface estate and you've written a lease and accepted it with an oil company or whatever, and they can come in and destroy that surface. Well, that surface is what the bank is using as
Value.
collateral or value for it,
Mhm.
right? So they may not want something that has an ability for someone to come in and damage or do something with it. So just all kinds of craziness, and they did add in those two, and it's still the same thing. Man, get them to an expert if they're concerned about it or what they are. And if you're going to list, if they tell you that they have the surface or they have the mineral rights, don't just go, okay, cool, you have the mineral rights.
Ask for documentation.
Well, and so let's say so what are you gonna look for, a lease?
I don't know. I've never seen one before because
So-
it's so
so-
rare.
So yeah, it is very rare. Burlington or the UP owned most of,
Uh-huh.
and still owns most of the mineral rights around here from when the railroad went through. But so if somebody goes, here's my proof, and I give you a lease from an oil company that says, hey, you're paying me $50 a month for my mineral rights or whatever the case is. Don't buy that either, because the oil companies go around and write all those leases and tie all those minerals up and then do the research. They're not going and finding the
it's not-
research.
Okay.
So people say all the time, well, I've got an oil lease. And they're like, we're paying you $50 a month to have the rights so that if we do find something, that I've already got it tied up,
Uh-huh.
right? And then they go dig their other part. And then sometimes even subdivisions, all it takes is like 50% of the subdivision
So
rights.
what I would do is I mean, I would probably submit that to the title company, right? Is
Well,
that,
title companies don't do mineral rights.
no, but
So the only thing you can do is you can go to a lawyer or you can have the title company do it, but you'd have to write into the contract that the mineral rights to be reserved.
mhm.
And then it actually has to be done on the deed. Otherwise, so if it said in additional provisions, mineral rights to be reserved, and you didn't have that done on the deed anywhere, then they would still transfer with it. So
Mhm.
go have a lawyer reserve it in the deed, or have the title company put the reservation in the deed.
Mhm.
And then you may not have them, but if you did have them,
You're
you've reserved them and you
Right.
kept them without sale of the property.
right.
Yeah, good stuff. Closing shall occur on or business days after mutual acceptance. They added that section in there. You're subject to all the existing leases, tenancies, all that kind of stuff, and they have been provided. So remember when you're writing an offer on something that has leases, this line says that you've already been provided with all of those leases. If you haven't, line that section out and make sure that you request them and a deadline in the additional provisions. Just saying that, okay, so this part is pretty normal, saying that you meet all these regulations, that you don't know of any exceptions to the property. This one is important though, because all the people that have been coming from California and other places have been getting upset because they go out and buy 40 acres out north of town somewhere. And then the guy next to them puts in a farm and starts farming and planting wheat and running cattle and doing whatever. And they were claiming that that's a nuisance and making a complaint for it. In Wyoming, that's a use by right. So
Yeah.
in Wyoming, you have the right to farm and ranch as long as you use generally accepted agricultural practices. The problem is that nobody was having that conversation with those people that were moving in. So you get somebody moving into a house out north of Burns on 40 acres and thinks that they're in a situation where you can't do that on the land next to you. And then they're upwind and they're plowing
Oh,
and being completely covered in
With,
dust.
in chaff.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. So it just have the conversation and make sure that people know when they're moving into rural areas like
Yeah.
that. But it is a use by right in Wyoming, and until that law changes, until that statute changes, they get the right to do whatever they want, as long as and there are nuisance deals, right? Manure piling up, now it's so deep that it's over the fence and it's smelling and whatever. That becomes a nuisance.
Yeah.
Just the manure there and having the cows there and the ag stuff is
Is
not.
not right.
And people don't know that from coming in from outside.
Right.
They added in phase 1, phase 2, and asbestos, which is the commercial version, right? That's kind of what you do on the commercial side. And then insurance coverage, cost, and availability. Don't know exactly how we're going to deal with this yet, so don't hammer me on it yet. But it is required. Hereby acknowledges that the buyer has been advised to investigate, research, and obtain a written commitment for adequate property and liability insurance prior to the objection deadline as referenced above. So the objection deadline still exists in here, but now along with inspections and those kinds of things, which technically insurance would be sort of an inspection, right? Always could look at whatever we wanted, but we're specifically putting language in that says you have to have basically an insurance commitment by the time we get to the objection. Now, how you deal with that right now? Same kind of thing you asked. Is there a mortgage verification form? Is there an insurance verification form? No.
nope.
Am I pushing the insurance verification, right? Am I looking at the objection deadline and going, does your buyer have insurance? And you look at me and go, mm-hmm, and we just believe it? Do we?
We don't get a deck page or anything,
No,
but we never know.
no, and that's why we can do
And
declarations. Or
How many times has it come and we're 1 week to close and you find out that there's no insurance and they're scrambling to get coverage?
Yeah.
Well, and that's what this is trying to avoid.
Uh-huh.
And this all of the insurance situation with uninsurability of people, fire line stuff.
So is
Hurricane
it
stuff.
a breach of contract then if they don't have their coverage before the objection deadline?
So here's the deal again, right? So it is a deadline in the contract. It doesn't show a specific repercussion there, so it would default to time is of the essence. Time is of the essence says if you are a non-breaching party, that the contract becomes voidable at your sole discretion.
Mhm.
So now the question is, if I want to hold their feet to the fire on the insurance one, did I miss a title commitment deadline? Did I miss something else where I'm not going to be a hard ass on enforcement? And then does it benefit me to be a hard ass on enforcement? And what happens after? What happens if I go, yep, you're out of contract? And they go a day later, here's my insurance sheet. Sorry, I was late. I mean, I don't know right now.
Right.
Colorado and South Dakota both have, and Louisiana have versions of this in their contracts. South Dakota basically says, hey, here's the deadline. If we go past that deadline, everybody just assumes it's okay and this contingency drops off and you can move forward. But ours isn't really written that way right now. So it's going to be interesting as to what happens with it. But it does bring it up much more to the forefront right now.
What line is that? Can you scroll up a little bit?
This is the
line
actual-
275.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it adds it in up here on 244, 243, and 244 as well.
Okay.
This language is back in there to you, at least. So,
So thank God, because that was the whole thing, we weren't having it in our forms going out, but on my listings, I was having it coming in.
yeah,
Mhm.
I've been adding that into an additional provision, that line.
So, because I had just asked Lana, because she said she was getting on the horn with Loop, but I'm like, Lana, they're going to be changing the forms next month. You're going to have them change them and then change them again.
Yeah, that's what I said last time.
Yeah.
I said it wasn't worth trying to get them changed at that point.
Right.
Again, added in definitions. Consents and acknowledgements on the purchase agreements. They added in that you can get paid as a sub-agent
Mhm.
because there is going to be, like I said, there's going to be some people that will only pay a sub-agent.